Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind kicked dust across the dry trail as Zadie Garver tightened her grip on her son's hand and looked up at the man who had just dismounted his horse. "I am not looking for help," she said, voice flat, jaw set. "And I am not asking for kindness." The cowboy pulled off his hat, sun catching the pale strands in his dark blonde hair. "Good thing I am not offering either," he said, stepping forward, boots crunching against the gravel. "I am offering a ride. That wagon axle is done for, and you are too far from anywhere." Zadie hesitated. Her daughter, Hazel, only 6, was asleep in the back of the broken wagon. Her son, Henry, stood quiet at her side, lips chapped, eyes wary. They had been walking since mid-morning, the horses gone lame 2 days ago, and she had done everything she could to keep them safe. But she was running out of ways. The cowboy looked at her, really looked. "My name is Ledger Vaughn," he said. "I am heading west to Fort Bridger. There is a town just past it with a doctor, clean water, and a roof. You and your kids can ride that far." Zadie's voice was low. "Do not make promises." Ledger's eyes held steady. "I will make just one. I will keep you safe." She met his gaze and for the first time in days let her shoulders fall. "All right," she whispered. Ledger got Hazel settled gently onto his horse, then lifted Henry up behind her. Zadie climbed up last, behind both children, and Ledger guided the reins, walking beside them. The road stretched long ahead, but the silence between them was not cold. It was careful. By dusk, they reached a clearing near a creek. Ledger built a fire while Zadie checked on her children. Hazel was still pale, but her breathing had steadied with the water she'd been given. Henry watched Ledger closely but did not speak. Ledger offered a plate of beans from his pack. "Eat," he said simply. Zadie took the plate. "You always ride alone," he shrugged. "Most days," she nodded. "People are trouble." Ledger looked at her. "Sometimes." She turned back to the fire, not sure why her chest felt tight. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the way he had not asked for anything in return. Later, when both children were asleep under blankets near the fire, Zadie sat across from Ledger in the orange light. Her face was worn from too many miles and not enough hope. "You are not curious," she asked, voice low, "about what, where we came from, why we were alone, why the wagon was empty?" Ledger looked at her, slow and honest. "No. If you want to tell me, you will." She stared at him a long moment, then said, "My husband left last fall, said he was going for work in Utah. Never came back. I waited through winter, sold what little we had left, packed the kids, and started west. Thought maybe we could find something better. Maybe a cousin in Idaho, but the money ran out, the horses gave out, and now we are here." Ledger nodded once. "I am sorry," she blinked. "That is it. I do not need more than that to help." Zadie looked down at her hands. "That is not how most men think. I am not most men." Something about the way he said it quiet, certain, made her chest ache again. She looked at him across the fire, and for the first time in months she was not afraid. They traveled 2 days together. Ledger kept his word, no questions, no pressure. He helped Hazel drink water, taught Henry how to hold the reins, and gave Zadie space. He never tried to charm her. He just showed up, steady as the sun. On the 3rd morning they reached a town near Fort Bridger. Ledger took them straight to the doctor's cabin. Hazel needed rest, fluids, and time. The doctor said she would be all right. Zadie sat on the porch afterward, watching the sun sink low. Ledger came out, leaned against the rail beside her. Neither spoke for a while. Then he said, "You are strong." She glanced at him, surprised. "I do not feel strong." "You are. Most people would have broken a long time ago." Zadie looked away. "Maybe I did." "No," Ledger said, turning to face her fully. "You did not." Emotion swelled in her throat. "Why are you like this?" He smiled, soft. "Like what? Kind, gentle. You do not even know us." "I know enough," he said. "I saw a woman with 2 kids doing everything she could to survive. That is all I needed." Zadie looked down, voice low. "People always say things at the start. Then they leave." "I told you," Ledger said. "I only make one promise, and I will keep it." She looked up at him, eyes full. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," he said. "But I would not mind staying for a while if you let me." Zadie did not answer right away. But she reached over slowly, took his hand and held it. That night, she slept inside the doctor's guest room with her children. Ledger stayed on the porch, but the next morning, when she stepped outside, he was still there. And he looked at her like she was the only thing worth staying for. The town was called Milner's Crossing, barely more than a trading post, a smithy, and a few squat buildings huddled along the river bend. The doctor's cabin sat at the edge of it, where the cottonwoods grew tall, and the air carried the smell of damp earth and iron. Zadie stood by the well with Henry, showing him how to work the pump handle without jerking it. His hands were small yet careful, and she watched him with a stillness that hadn't come easily in months. Ledger was across the yard, kneeling beside Hazel as he showed her how to stack kindling for the kitchen stove. She was sitting upright now, her cheeks flushed with warmth rather than fever. Zadie didn't interrupt them. She just watched, one hand resting on the pump handle, the other shading her eyes from the morning sun. "Ledger," Hazel said, pushing a stick into the pile, "do you think mules are smarter than horses?" Ledger squinted at the neat bundle of twigs. "Depends on the mule. Some of them are too clever for their own good." Hazel laughed softly, and the sound was so light, so free of strain, that Zadie blinked hard and turned back to the pump. Later, while Henry napped and Hazel helped the doctor's wife fold clean linens, Ledger found Zadie behind the cabin. She was standing in the vegetable patch, running her fingers over the new shoots of green poking through the soil. There were rows of cabbage, beets, and something leafy she couldn't name. "You've got a way with plants?" he asked, leaning on the fence post. She didn't look up. "I used to. My mother kept a garden. I learned by watching her hands. I figure this ground hasn't seen a real gardener in a good while." She touched a beet leaf, dry at the tip. "It's all been neglected." Ledger stepped closer but didn't crowd her. "You planning to keep moving west?" "I was," she said, brushing soil from her fingers, "but I don't know any more." He waited. She turned to face him, arms folded. "The children are settling. Hazel smiles more. Henry's sleeping through the night. I don't want to rip them from that just to chase after a cousin who might not even be where I remember." "You don't have to decide now." "I know," she said. "But if we stay too long, it'll start to feel like home, and I'm not sure I trust that." Ledger looked down at the dirt between them. "A place can't break your trust, Zadie. Only people do." She drew a slow breath. "That's what I'm afraid of." He nodded, then glanced toward the cabin. "The doctor's been asking about a hand at the smithy. I worked iron a few years back in Kansas." "Wouldn't be hard to take it up again." She stared at him. "You'd stay." "I said I'd keep you safe. Harder to do that from the trail." Zadie's voice was quiet. "It's different staying, I know." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on him longer than they had before. Then she turned and knelt in the dirt, tugging gently at a weed near the cabbage row. Ledger crouched beside her without a word, pulling another. That evening, after supper, the four of them sat outside. The sky had turned the color of old pennies, and smoke from the chimney curled into the cooling air. Henry was carving a little wooden horse with a borrowed penknife. Hazel leaned against Zadie's side, half asleep. Ledger sat across from them, turning a small tin cup in his hands. Zadie looked at him, her voice low with fatigue and something else she hadn't put a name to yet. "You've been looking for a place," he nodded once. "For a while." She met his eyes. "Maybe we both stopped looking at the same time." He didn't speak. Just set the tin cup down and reached across the space between them, slow and sure. She laid her hand in his without hesitation. Hazel stirred, blinking up at her mother. "Are we going to stay here?" Zadie looked at Ledger, then down at her children. "Yes," she said. "I think we are." The wind shifted, soft through the trees, and somewhere in the dark, a nightbird called. It wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something they could build with their own hands, shaped not by fear or fleeing, but by choice. By the middle of May, the frost had thinned and buttercups grew wild along the riverbank. Zadie sat behind the cabin with an old shirt of Henry's in her lap, using a needle and thread to patch a rip along the sleeve. The doctor's wife had offered her small jobs mending, cleaning, helping tend the garden, and Zadie took them quietly. She liked the rhythm of work that didn't carry danger with it. Ledger came around the side of the cabin just after sundown, his hands blackened with soot and steel dust. He carried a tin pail filled with water from the creek. Instead of heading straight to the basin, he set it beside the stoop and sat down beside her. "I'll wash up after," he said. "Didn't want to miss the light." Zadie didn't look up from the needle. "That shirt's been through more than most men." "I believe it." She tied off the thread and snipped it with her teeth, then folded the shirt and set it in the basket beside her. Ledger leaned back on his elbows, exhaling through his nose. "They're building a new barn behind the livery," he said. "Owner asked if I could help with the framing." "You going to?" "Already said yes." She nodded once. "You seem to be making yourself useful everywhere." "I like having something to do." She brushed a piece of thread from her skirt. "You never talk about where you came from." Ledger didn't answer right away. The quiet between them stretched, filled only by the sound of water running through the grass at the edge of the yard. "I worked cattle in the Red Hills for a time," he said finally. "Before that, I was in Abilene." "Before that, Missouri. My father was a cooper, taught me to shape barrels before I could write my name." Zadie turned to him. "What happened?" "He died the year the war ended," Ledger said. "My mother passed not long after. I left the town with a horse and a saddle bag. Figured if there wasn't anything pulling me back, I'd keep riding forward." She studied his profile. The last light of day caught the edge of his jaw, the crease between his brow. "You ever think about going back?" He shook his head. "There's no one left to go back for." Zadie's hands stilled in her lap. "My mother used to say the land remembers things," she said softly. "Even when people forget, I used to believe that made places sacred. Now I think it just makes them heavy." Ledger turned toward her, his voice low. "If a place feels heavy, maybe it's time to build something lighter on top of it." Zadie looked at him for a long moment, then reached into the basket and pulled out the next piece to mend. Her fingers moved slower this time, more careful. "Hazel asked if we'd ever have our own house again," she murmured. "What you tell her?" "I didn't," Zadie said. "I didn't want to make a promise I couldn't keep." Ledger straightened, brushing his palms together to knock off the soot. Then he stood, took the folded shirt from the basket and laid it across the stoop. "You don't have to make any promises," he said. "But if you ever decide to try again, I know how to shape wood." She looked up, eyes catching his. "That's so. It is." He stepped back toward the pail and rinsed his hands, the water turning gray, then he glanced over his shoulder. "Come by the livery tomorrow," he said. "You'll see." The next morning, Zadie left Henry with the doctor's wife and walked with Hazel across town. The livery stood near the edge of the main road, its roof half-framed, fresh lumber stacked beside a wagon wheel. Inside, Ledger crouched beside a sawhorse, measuring a length of beam. Hazel tugged at Zadie's skirt. "Is he building all of that?" "Looks like he's helping." Ledger looked up, saw them, and lifted a hand. He didn't stop working, just gave a small nod and turned back to the wood. Hazel darted forward and crouched beside him. Zadie stayed at the threshold, leaning against the door frame, watching her daughter talk and Ledger listen. He handed her a square of sandpaper and showed her how to run it along the grain. Zadie let the moment settle in her chest like a warm stone. The kind that holds heat long after the fire's gone out. She didn't move for a long time. Not until Hazel looked back and waved her in. Then, quietly, Zadie stepped inside. The wind had shifted by the time late June settled over Milner's Crossing, the air thick with the scent of pine pitch and warm grass. Zadie stood at the edge of the small plot behind the doctor's cabin. Her fingers dug deep into the soil as she lifted a young onion bulb from the earth. The skin peeled back easily, slick with damp, and she laid it gently into the basket beside her. Hazel's voice rang out from the front yard. "Mama, Henry's stuck on the fence again." Zadie straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked around the side of the cabin. Ledger was already there, crouching in the tall grass, lifting Henry down from the split rail fence with an ease that made Zadie pause. The boy clung to his shoulder longer than needed, and Ledger let him. "Didn't I say not to climb it when your boots are muddy?" Zadie crossed her arms. Henry looked down, lips pressed together. Ledger set him on the ground, brushing dust from the boy's shirt. "He was just trying to see the beehive," Ledger said gently. "Didn't touch it." Zadie's mouth twitched. "Still dangerous," Ledger nodded. "I'll show him a safer way to look. There's a hollow log near the river. Bees nest there every summer." She gave a reluctant nod, then turned to Hazel, who was twirling a dandelion stem between her fingers. "You help me rinse the onions?" Hazel ran ahead, barefoot, curls bouncing. Later that evening, Ledger knocked lightly on the doorframe before stepping inside. The cabin's kitchen was dim, oil lamp casting soft shadows up the wall. Zadie stood at the table, slicing bread with a worn blade knife. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and her hair had slipped from its braid. Ledger stepped closer, brushing dirt from under his fingernails. "I've been thinking," she glanced up. "That's always dangerous," he smiled, quiet. "There's a piece of land east of town. Belongs to a man named Dorsey. He's old, half-blind, says he can't keep up with it. Wants to sell it off in pieces." Zadie paused, knife still in hand. "And? I was considering buying a stretch of it, maybe build something of my own, not big, just enough." She set the knife down and turned to face him fully. "You have money for land, some, been saving since Kansas." "I don't spend much." She studied him, eyes narrowed. "Why are you telling me?" Ledger's voice was steady. "Because I don't want to build it alone," her breath caught. "Don't ask me for things I don't know how to give." "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm telling you what I want." "You don't owe me anything, Zadie, but I'd lay down every board with your name in my mind." She stepped back, leaning against the table's edge, arms crossed. "You don't know what I'd be like in a still life. I've only ever been running." "Then let's stop running in the same direction," he said. "Start walking into something." She looked down at her hands, palms rough from work, knuckles nicked with garden blisters. "You really think we could have a home again?" "I don't think," he said. "I believe." The room fell silent but not heavy. She reached for the bread and finished slicing it slowly, measured. When she was done, she wrapped the slices in cloth and handed them to him. "For the morning," she said. "You'll need strength if you're speaking to Dorsey." Ledger took the bundle, fingers brushing hers. "I'll bring you with me if you'll come." She didn't answer. But as he stepped out into the cooling dusk, she stood at the door and watched him walk down the path, the lamp behind her casting a long, warm shadow across the floor. That night, she dreamed of cedar beams and morning light through clean windows. And when she woke, her heart didn't ache from the dream it reached for it. By early July, the land was theirs. Ledger signed the deed with his name in clean, straight lines, the ink still drying as Zadie pressed her fingers into the soft wood of the new fence rail. The plot sat on a gentle rise east of town, where the soil turned dark and sweet near the edge of the cottonwood grove. From the porch they'd build, she could already picture the morning light settling across the earth like a shawl. The children stood nearby. Hazel crouched beside a cluster of wild strawberry plants, Henry tracing a stick through the dirt in looping shapes. They were quiet, but not uncertain. The rhythm of the town had softened them, and the presence of Ledger had steadied them. Zadie turned to him as he stepped up beside her, his coat slung over one shoulder, hat in hand. "You think it'll hold through winter?" she asked, nodding to the frame of the house, half raised. "If I set the beams," he said, "it'll take more than snow to bring it down." She brushed away a strand of hair that had fallen loose from her braid. "I don't know how to be part of something that doesn't need running." Ledger rested a hand against one of the new posts. "You've already built it, Zadie, just didn't stop long enough to see it stand." She looked out across the land, the way it curved down toward the creek, the trees hanging heavy with late green. "I never thought of a place as something you could grow into." "Maybe that's what makes it last," he said. "When it grows with you." She turned to face him fully, voice quiet but sure. "I want to build it with you, not just the house, all of it. The life." Ledger's eyes didn't flinch. "Then we'll do it together." That night, Henry stayed with the doctor's wife, and Hazel curled up beneath a quilt beside the hearth of the unfinished cabin, her lashes still flecked with river dust. Zadie and Ledger sat outside on the steps, the stars coming out slow and steady. Zadie set her hand on his knee, the weight of it certain. "I never thought I'd feel safe like this again." He didn't speak, just turned his hand over beneath hers and held it. In the weeks that followed, the cabin rose board by board, the roof shingled in cedar, the floor planked with pine Ledger had traded for at the mill. Zadie tended the garden they started near the southern edge, where the soil stayed damp, and Hazel scattered seeds with care. Henry helped Ledger carry tools, his back straightening more each day. By the time August passed, the windows were in, and the door swung smooth on its hinges. Zadie stitched curtains from old flour sacks, softening the square light that filtered across the table Ledger had built by hand. One evening, long after the children had gone to bed, Zadie stood barefoot in the kitchen, brushing flour from her palms. Ledger leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her in the lantern glow. "You're staring," she said without turning. "I'm remembering." She looked over. "What? The first time I saw you, dust in your hair, jaw set like stone, you looked at me like I was one more thing to get through." She dried her hands and crossed the room, her bare feet quiet on the wood. And now, he reached for her waist, pulled her in soft and sure. "Now I know I want to wake up beside you every morning I've got left." She touched his face, her thumb brushing the edge of his cheek. "Then let's stop waiting." They married under the cottonwoods in early September, the town preacher standing between two trees while the wind carried the scent of apples. Hazel wore a wreath of goldenrod, and Henry held the rings in a carved wooden box he had made himself. Zadie wore a dress she'd sewn from unbleached cotton, and Ledger had trimmed his beard, his shirt pressed and clean. When he took her hands, he didn't speak vows from memory. He spoke them from the life they'd built. "I've lived a long time without knowing where I belonged," he said. "But I knew the first time I saw you, I'll never walk away from what we've made here. Not ever." She squeezed his fingers. "I've carried storms in my chest since the day I left Missouri. But you are the first place that's ever made me quiet inside." They kissed beneath the turning leaves, and the town gathered around them, not out of obligation, but because they'd become part of something steady. That winter, the snow came early, but the house held firm. Zadie baked bread near the hearth while Ledger mended harness leather at the table. Hazel read aloud from a primer book, and Henry carved a whistle from a birch branch. Each evening, Ledger pulled Zadie close beneath the quilts, her back against his chest, her breath even. In the spring, the garden bloomed. By the time Hazel turned 7, she had her own stool in the kitchen and hands strong enough to knead dough. Henry built a rabbit hutch behind the cabin. The children laughed more, slept deeper, trusted longer. Zadie stood on the porch one evening, Ledger's arm wrapped around her waist. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress, and the land around them glowed gold with the setting sun. Ledger pressed a kiss to her temple. "Does it feel like home yet?" he asked. She rested her head on his shoulder. "No," he stilled. She smiled. "It feels like more than that," and it did. It felt like belonging, like the ache had finally unknotted in her chest. Like every mile she'd walked had led her here, not to a place, but to a man who saw her strength, not her fear. To children who laughed again. To land that gave back what they'd sown. They stayed, together, always.